Hello, economics students. Today, we're putting it all together. We've looked at demand shifters and we've looked at supply shifters, and now we're going to be looking at what happens to both of them when it comes to price equilibrium. I'd like to remind you that our multiple choice test is on Friday, October 23rd. It is 35 questions and 50 minutes. It is open note, and I will be available on Google Meets during the test for questions. I'll be assigning the self-guided review on the 22nd, and I'll also put the study guide on Schoology. If you have questions about this test or what topics you would like more review on, please let me know. Please come to my office hours. If you are just tuning into this and you have class on Monday, October 19th, I highly recommend that you join the Google Meet for the class, even though this is not your day to be on Google Meet, as I believe participating in the Pear Deck presentation will be to your benefit, because this is can be a little tricky. Make sure that you have paper and pencil ready. There are some handouts that you'll need some later on, but I would definitely be practicing these graphs on your own and pausing as we go so that you fully understand what we're talking about. I also recommend that you read the textbook and that you look at the chapter 6, which is on equilibrium. We'll be looking particularly at learning target 2E, putting it all together. So what this does is it helps us to illustrate and project the effect of price and quantity when a supply or demand shifts in a market. So as we prepare for the test, you're going to have to be able to determine both whether it's a demand shifter that we're looking at or a supply shifter, and how that's going to affect the price that you pay when you get to the store. So is it supply or demand that determines the market price of a chocolate bar? I happen to love 100 grand bars. I don't know what's going to happen with Halloween this year, but boy, those were always my favorite. The reality is that the equilibrium price is what we get when both those who are supplying and those who are demanding come to an agreement on what they're willing to supply and at what they're willing to pay. And so we see here price per bar, $1.20, quantity demanded 300, quantity supplied 300. The market and the consumer are in agreement, and therefore they reach equilibrium. So we are going to be using data from supply and demand schedule, and we are going to graph it. Okay, so this is a graph. You can see the supply, and of course suppliers are willing to give, if you look here, they would be happy to make 500 bars at $2 a piece, but the customers aren't willing to buy that. What they're willing to buy is 300 at 120 per piece. Now we're going to be going through a lot of examples here. Like I said, I recommend that you write down the graphs, that you anticipate what is going to happen, and then that you check your answers. So that's our topic today: what happens to equilibrium when demand or supply shifts. Okay. This is really, really important. I would make sure that you write down all of these, and you actually devote these to memory if you can. This is called a mnemonic device. So when we have demand shifters, we're talking about tires. And I'm not going to read all of those because you can read. And when we talk about supply shifters, we're talking about tigers. Now make sure you know the difference between tires and tigers. And we'll have talked about each of them, and we will continue to talk about them today. But like I said, I would make sure you have this written down, have it with you on the day of the test. You will need to know these things. Okay, so when we have a demand increase, the demand curve is going to shift to the right. So there we go. D2, it shifts to the right. So just try to remember these things. And then we look at the price and the quantity. So if a demand increases, and this, I would definitely write this graph down. you have a demand increase, both the price that a customer is willing to pay and the quantity that a producer is willing to produce will increase. Okay? Now, if the demand decreases, think about this for a second. Pause if you need to. Which way will the demand curve go? It goes to the left, and the effect on price and quantity is that both will go down. So suppliers will produce less when consumers are paying at a lower price. That's because of a demand decrease. If supply increases, so in this case, we have the supply curve, again, shifting to the right, and that's what it looks like. What will happen then? In that case, we will have the price that the consumer is paying actually goes down while the quantity increases. Okay, so that's kind of counterintuitive. You think, oh, supply increases, but when supplies increase, our prices go down. When we have maybe more gas or oil than we normally would, our price is going to go down and the quantity is going to increase. And finally, if the supply decreases, we have a shift. Which direction? To the left. And in this case, we will have both the price increasing, but the quantity decreasing because people don't want to pay as much at a higher price. Okay, so those are the basic principles. Now let's look at some practice. If demand increases, the price goes up, the quantity goes up. So when we go from the demand curve, shifting here, demand 1 to demand 2, and now you can see where it starts getting a little bit confusing. We have then the quantity supplied going up to 400 because people all of a sudden they just get this great craving for chocolate. It does actually affect a number of neurochemicals in the brain, so why not? And customers are willing to pay $1.60. Well, then the producers are willing to produce more. Let's say demand goes down. The health department comes out and says, chocolate's really not good for you. It's going to make you overweight. Maybe it's too much sugar and you're going to get diabetes, and the word starts getting out, you shouldn't be eating chocolate bars. Well, then the demand is going to decrease. And what is the new quantity demanded? As we can see here, what you need to do is here's the original supply and demand. Now we have the demand curve 2 here, and we need to find the intersection of the new demand curve and the quantity here. So at 80 cents, the quantity supplied is 200 bars. Let's say if supply increases. Now, think about what some of the reasons are for an increase in supply. Maybe in the United States here, a new market for chocolate, the plant that grows chocolate beans is developed, and the supply of just chocolate beans, cocoa beans, increases, and that increases the amount of chocolate available. So supply increases. So what's going to happen there? We have the supply shift to the right. We have the price go down because we have more supply, okay? And overall, we're going to have both an increase in supply, but a decrease in price, okay? Now we're getting tricky. If supply decreases, okay, so the chocolate market has dried off. Most of our cocoa beans come from offshore, so maybe there has been some government intervention that has put a tariff on cocoa beans. Well, then the supply is going to shift to the left. The price is going to go up, but you know what? People just don't want to pay. Not as many people want to pay $1.60 for chocolate, so now we have the supply going down while the price goes up. Okay, so steps to analyzing changes in equilibrium. Does the event shift the supply curve or the demand curve? So remember, think about, is it tires or tigers, and in which direction, left or right? then think about the reason. And sometimes it's actually easier to think through the reasons as you're trying to determine whether it's a demand shift or supply shift. So what is the reason for the shift? And then draw and label the new curve on your graph. So again, doing this by hand is going to be really helpful for you rather than just trying to think it through. Locate the new equilibrium, so this is the price and quantity, and compare it to the old equilibrium, price and quantity. Did it increase or decrease? So in other words, did the equilibrium, the price and quantity, decrease or increase? So let's practice some more. Okay, so here's a headline. Farmers invent new apple picking machine. Harvest the apples in half the time. Wow, that is really a big change. So would you predict, and here's where I would suggest that you write this down on a piece of paper, just make this graph, and predict, is this a demand shift? Is it tires? Or is it a supply shift? Is it tigers? So go ahead and draw your line and see what you think it will be. Okay, first of all, it is going to be a supply shifter, so it's going to turn to the right or move to the right, and the price will go down because the quantity has gone up. And the part of tigers that this is technology. Technology has decreased the time that it takes to harvest apples, therefore the supply will increase. And this is a good thing for consumers because the price goes down and the quantity goes up, and both the harvesters of the apples and the consumer is happy with this arrangement. Okay, so now we're going to look at the headline, Nation's Largest Spaghetti Producer Drops Prices. So this is going to be, what we're looking at is the demand for spaghetti sauce. You may recall that spaghetti sauce is a complementary good to spaghetti. So it's the R, a replacement, in this case a complementary good that would go with spaghetti. So spaghetti sauce, the demand for that is going to go up because the demand for spaghetti goes up. So the price, what the effect is going to be then is that the price for spaghetti sauce is actually going to go up because as the quantity goes up. Now again, we have our spaghetti is lower, that price is lower, but the complementary good is going to be in greater demand. It's going to shift the demand to the right, and therefore both price and quantity will go up for that related good, complementary good. Freezing temperatures destroy much of Florida's citrus crop. This was something that I talked about in class. So what is this freezing temperatures? What is going to happen to the orange juice? Is it going to affect demand or supply, and how will it affect prices? Okay, so let's think about this. It is going to be a supply shifter. It's going to shift the supply to the right, and as it shifts the supply to the right, again, we look at the equilibrium of the new supply curve and demand curve, and we're going to have the price actually going up while the quantity goes down. It's a natural disaster, a frozen citrus crop. Colorado ski resorts announced 50% increase in lift ticket prices. Now, how is this going to affect hotel rooms at Colorado ski resorts? It's going to be pretty expensive to go skiing. Lift tickets are already quite expensive. So is it going to affect the supply curve or the demand curve? Think about that first, and then think about which direction. Okay. So what happens is the demand curve goes to the left, and as it does this, the actual price of the hotel rooms will go down, The quantity will go down, and this is the related good from tires, complementary. And you can see this illustrated here and here. Okay, so this is where there is a handout that is on your Schoology page, and I suggest that you get this out. If you look on my Schoology page, you won't see this because this is it's not published for you, but you'll see the equilibrium handout. Print this out for practice, or if you don't have a printer, then just do it on a piece of paper, and then open up this market headlines and equilibrium shifters. This will be very much like what you had before. It will have market headlines and equilibrium shifters, and what you'll need to do is follow the headlines carefully, read the headline, and then you'll see here which curve shifts, what is the shifter, graph the change, and then what's the effect on the equilibrium price, the EQ price. Is it up or down? So on the price and on the quantity. So you get practice using the arrows for this. Now, this particular graph, again, you'll say, which graph represents the impact of this event on the market for athletics shoes? So if we go back a slide, we see that the price of rubber increases dramatically. Well, that is going to affect probably the supply. It's probably going to decrease the new supply. So you'll click on decrease in supply. You'll graph the change, and then you'll identify what is the shifter. Is it tires or tigers? Which curve shifts, demand or supply, and then the up or down. Okay, so you can see here in this first example, it is the supply shifter. The supply has gone to the left because of the resource cost. And then you choose the headline. So which of these is it? Now, if you go back to this, you can see that the price here too goes up while the quantity goes down. So you would click on this one, and it won't let you go on until you get it right. So just keep in mind that this is the final outcome, and that you will not be able to go on. You might think that there's a problem with the program. No, the problem is that you haven't gotten it right. So make sure that you get the correct answer, and then you'll be able to move on. Done with that headline, move on to the next one. The cups of coffee practice I will be assigning to you actually tomorrow, so don't worry about that one today. All right, thank you for your attention.